And it's back to the original artistry.
The original main hall looks like it did when the building opened in 1894. It served as a chapel from 1894 when the building opened.
We cannot be here without also seeing these wonderful stained glass windows. Graves Hall, Winant's Auditorium are just a very proud example of the atmosphere of the Hope College campus. We are coming to you from the Hope College campus in Holland, Michigan, and our intent today is to share with you the building that you see behind us. The Graves Hall, Winant's Auditorium was dedicated in 1894, and since that time has been the academic center of the Hope College campus. In the last couple of years, it has gone through an adaptive restoration to not only bring it to its original beauty, but also make it a more useful building to the people at present. Sharing the story with me today is Dr. Elton Bruins, Professor Emeritus of American Religion at Hope College. Elton, first of all, over 100 years ago, there was an apparent need for this building. Talk about that a bit, please.
Thank you, I'd be happy to. The college buildings, of such as they were at that time, were located in the northeast corner of the campus, which is back behind us there. There was Van Vleck Hall. That was a beautiful stately building of Italianate architecture. The other buildings were quite commonplace to serve a continuing and increasing need of the college. What they needed, number one, was a library. The library had about 6,000 volumes. It didn't have a permanent home. Another one, they needed more classrooms. And third, we needed a new chapel. What was serving as a chapel at that time, from 1862 to 1894, was a gymnasium. So I would say those are the three reasons why the college needed a new building such as this.
The location of the building at the present location has its own unique story.
Yes, I think it does. And I think I'm correct on this, because the first buildings were on that northeast corner. The President's House was under construction in the 1880s, and that's sort of in the middle of the block on 10th Street. But the only thing on this whole end of the campus was a brick building called the Hope Printing Plant. And it stood right here, well, right in the center there, because it really stopped any further thought on the part of the city, or prior to that the township, from having 11th Street go through. Because already in 1860, Principal Phelps, Philip Phelps, and Dr. Van Raalte went to court in Grand Haven to make the township cease and desist in putting a road through here, or the street through here. And so by having that brick building was one way of saying, too, we're going to have a square block of 16 acres as our campus. So then this was a very nice replacement of that plain brick printing house.
The names on the building, Winant's and Graves, stately and well known to everyone. The background to those two names being on these buildings.
There are three major contributors to the building. It anticipated it was going to cost $30,000 at that time. So a Miss Lyda Van Skak, I think in northern Jersey or New York City, gave 10. The Winant's family gave 10, and that's why we see the word Winant's Chapel, because before we called it an auditorium, it served as the chapel. And so that's Winant's Chapel. He was a shipbuilder and made a fortune, and this is given in his memory by his widow and daughter. And the last one, or the third one, is a very significant Nathan F. Graves, a lawyer from Syracuse, New York. He went into real estate, I believe, and made a fortune. And he was also a bibliophile. He loved books and had a library of 10,000 volumes, about 10,000 volumes. Then, in his generosity with his money, came the generosity of half of his library. So that was a critical contribution to our college library, because up until that time it consisted so much of retired ministers' libraries. Now we got a large amount of books in literature and in history. And many copies yet of that gift still exist in our current Ben Wyland Library.
Dr. Bruins, along with talking about this wonderful structure, the architect, the architecture, and the construction of this building must be a marvelous story in itself.
I think so. The architect came from Chicago, a man by the name of William K. Johnston. He was a known quantity here in Holland because there were some buildings he had already constructed, public buildings and private homes. So he was known from that. So he must have been around here enough times that people got to know him. So he was engaged from Chicago. Even though he was a relatively young man, that is, from my point of view, he was not yet 40, that was a factor, that he was that young, because 30 years later, he's called back to design the new chapel, Dimnent Chapel, which stands here on the Hope College campus also.
Dr. Bruins, as can be seen, we're now on the east entrance of the building. And because of the adaptive restoration, a number of changes had to be made.
Very much so. Two major requirements had to be met. One was accessibility, and the other was the fire code. At first, we asked the architects if they could place this new stairway and new elevator inside the building. They examined it. No, there wasn't enough room. So the building had to be extended here as it is here today. So now there is an elevator, there's an enclosed stairway to the good. The next issue was how to match the original Waverly Stone. The stone of 1894 came from a quarry northeast of town here, the Waverly Quarry. That provided major building block material for construction of many buildings in town, and as well as this one. Now, there was some stone that was saved. When they added the addition, they scraped all the other stone, took all the other stone off, and that could be saved. But there wasn't enough. They had to find another a source, and they found it in a company that quarried stone in Ohio. That company brought four specimens here. They were right alongside the building here. Then we chose the color that seemed to have matched. So I think overall it's been a good job. In a few years, I think as this stone weathers, it will look much like the original part of the building. So an ancient, shall we say, or an old kind of building block is nicely augmented by new building block, and in time we hope they'll look about the same.
Dr. Bruins, we will next follow through on the inside of the Winans Auditorium. Dr. Bruins, we are now located in this ornate, beautiful structure known as the Winans Auditorium. This structure has gone through a number of major changes and seemingly to improve it each time. But talk about the changes that have really affected the layout of this building.
The room has had three major changes. First, as a sign outside on the building calls it Winans Chapel. It served as a chapel from 1894 when the building opened until Dimnent Memorial Chapel opened in 1929. Then by 1931, even though it was a depression, the librarian requested the college to have this extended into library space. So the floor was made level. It originally was a sloping floor. That was done in 1931. And it served as library space until the new library was built in 1961, Van Zuren Library. At that time, by 62, this building underwent another major change. First, that this was restored into an auditorium again, and that's why we call it Winans Auditorium today. That worked until, and it really did continue to work as an auditorium, but in 1980, the configuration of the seats were changed. Then the seats were placed diagonally rather than in this present mode, and a large screen was placed over here in the southwest corner of the room. Then that served, so it made the room more into, say, a theater type thing, and also effective for a very large classroom space when some large classes were held here.
We cannot be here without also seeing these wonderful stained glass windows, and they have a story of their own.
We can probably call them the highlight of the room here, and they have their own interesting story, because President Collins must have thought that he had enough money to add this, what might be called a luxury feature, a beautiful glass. The artist is someone unknown, very likely from a Chicago firm. So they were placed in 1894 when the building opened, and they lasted until 1980. Then in order to darken the room, they were taken out because they had deteriorated. Stained glass windows are hard to maintain because lead is soft and weathering affects them. But then they were taken out and a large black board was placed over it so the room could be completely darkened. Happily, the pieces were given to Mr. John Vandenberg, a stained glass artist in Zealand. He used it for many of his creations. And when he retired, he gave what was left to Mr. Tom Blackburn of pristine glass in Grand Rapids. So when the restoration was underway, he was contacted to reconstruct them. Happily also, a picture had been taken of them in the early 60s, so you saw it very clearly what the design was. There were the pieces, couldn't be revealed from what I'm sure he was left to him, but by doing that, and because he had pieces, he knew what the colors were. So I think he restored them to almost the original color and design.
Such a stately room, and the windows make it such a delightful, beautiful room.
Yeah. One other little touch is that all the layers of paint were removed so that you see the ends of the supports here. The carvings are much more distinct now. So that also adds to distinctiveness, as well as these windows, and all the side pieces have been restored to original design.
Dr. Bruins, we're now going to make the move to the entry hallway and the stairway. Dr. Bruins, we're now in the entryway and the stairway of this building, and it in itself has a great story, and it's back to the original artistry.
Yes, and that's one of the wonderful things about the restoration of the building, that the original main hall looks like it did when the building opened in 1894, because we have the grand staircase, we have the wainscoting all around the first floor, and above all, we see this beautiful ceiling again. After the 1962 renovation and change there, the ceiling had been dropped, and that was all lost to public view. The staircase was removed, and the wainscoting was taken away. So it was really stripped of all these nice pieces or these nice parts that give the beauty to the hallway that we have now at the present time.
And as we talk about the usefulness of the building and the various auditoriums that we've been in the President's Room, remind us of the use of this building as a classroom for daily students.
Well, that's a good point, because it was a classroom from day one. All the classrooms were then in Van Vleck Hall, which was crowded. President's family lived there, the students lived there, and the library was there some of the time. So it was a very crowded building. President Phelps then had a few other buildings built, like what he called the grammar school, where the prep school lived and met, and then the charter hall. There were other classrooms, but the classrooms, the need of classrooms was number one here. So when it opened in 1894, we had 5 new classrooms, and that's what we have today. Now, that took some time and some effort, because when students were going to use the building on a regular basis, then the state regulations kicked in as far as fire and accessibility codes. So it took 6 months to get clearance from the state. But then the new elevator was put in, 2 enclosed staircases had to have, and one is right in this extension, another one is right next to the portrait room behind the portraits there. So this brought back, so that now today, it isn't just a nice pretty building to be observed, it's a very useful building, because when school is in session, you have these 5 classrooms, one after another, students in the building all the time. But the reconstruction, the adaptive renovation was very good, because with the new floors, it's easy to keep up, and you really can't see that this building has been in use now for a year. So I think the plans to have classrooms here, and with the adaptive restoration, they'll have the staircase put back and the ceiling revealed, and the new wainscoting has really added to the beauty of this building.
Dr. Bruins, now being in the President's Room, talk about not only the specialness, but the history of this beautiful room.
This part was the library stack section. Yes. and that's why the windows are placed as they are. Then in the major renovation of 1962, this was floored over and a second floor was added. And now in our new restoration, that was all removed and we have this room. So it's still 2 stories tall, but they placed this floating ceiling in here to, shall we say, to hide a lot of the heavy equipment that had to go into the building for modern needs. But this is a lovely room. There was first a debate in our committee about it as to what to do. Even the president thought he might like to make this part of the building his office, but we felt in the committee finally that it needed to remain a classroom building. But this was then reserved for the presidential portraits, because in the one placed in 1962 was just to the right of the front entrance, and it got to be too small. We had some addition, since that was done in 62, we've had several portraits added. So this became a nice solution that we can have this room as the presidential portraits room.
Graves Hall, Winans Auditorium are just a very proud example of the atmosphere of the Hope College campus. Both Dr. Bruins and myself are graduates of Hope College, and as we see the restoration of buildings like this, plus the wonderful new things on campus, it only rebuilds and adds to our tremendous pride and appreciation for the quality of everything about Hope College.